Good morning, everybody. I'm honored to be here. Bonjour. It's a pleasure to see you all. This may be the last day that you see me because today we're voting on Prop 30. So if it doesn't pass, we may have to close the university. And I'm glad to be here today. Tomorrow, I don't know. So I'd like to start with a slide that is very dear to me. This is a work of art made by the American Man Ray for an early version of Compagnie Parisienne de Distribution d'Électricité. I don't know if that turned into EDF or not. But he was commissioned to make a series of photographs to celebrate electricity in 1931. Now, this is a very emotional issue, right? He made electricity spectacular. He made it span the globe. He connected very intimate experiences like heat with very global experiences like light and switches and night coming over on one half of the planet Earth and the moon showing up. And so for him, that was a very emotional experience. However, when we look at a network of reliability today, we somehow lost that emotional touch. And as a game designer, I have to say that if the game doesn't feel right, nobody will play it. And so there's no engagement. So I'm interested in how can we build better engagement for what we call the smart city. And I'd like to refer back to my colleague Matt's comment about hot coffee. There's that joke about buying hot coffee, and the hot coffee's for free, but they charge you for the cup. So hot coffee sounds good sometimes, and hot coffee is kind of like a smart city. But if you don't have the trust, you don't have the cup that contains that energy, right? So the trust is very important. So I asked in a Mechanical Turk survey, people, about 25 or so people, how they rated the following images in terms of trust. And 2 was trusted every time, and -2 was never trusted. And so I'm going to go down in the reverse order of trust, and we'll see what happens. So everybody seems to trust this stoplight here. The power outlet is another thing we trust almost all the time. Then we go down to the smart meter, and this thing is already suffering a little bit in trust. We don't trust it all the time. And part of the reason is that it flashes these 8s at us. I don't know if you have these things at home, but every time I look at it, it just flashes 8 at me. And I know from my alarm clock that if it flashes 8 at me, that means it's not working. And so I have a hard time trusting that display. And maybe that's what people responded to in the survey. Next, very interestingly, an electrician at a circuit breaker, that's somewhat trustworthy, a little bit less trustworthy than the smart meter, but still more trustworthy than the very same circuit breaker without an electrician at it. So the presence of somebody working with a yellow hat, I think it's all about the yellow hat. Somebody working with a yellow hat, that helps, right? Then we go to these things that in the United States still hang in our neighborhoods. I think in France you got rid of those a long time ago. They're underground now, yes. In Europe we see them less frequently. You still have some of them? Yes? No, see, they're all gone. Well, good job, because we don't quite trust them that much, right? It's 0.65. It's approaching the average trust, and it looks dangerous. And Steven Spielberg makes them blow up in movies every now and then. So we know there's something dangerous happening there. Power lines, we don't quite trust those either, less so than even those things here, because these, at least we know them from our neighborhood. These always seem somewhere else and seem dangerous. I know there's stories about farmers putting loops of electricity wire underneath the power line so they can scavenge the power. It's a very interesting way of harvesting power through electromagnetics. And this guy here, we trust him less than the power lines, because we don't know quite why he comes to our house. It seems to be some kind of a violation of our private domain. And every time they show up, we're like, well, what are you doing here? And oh, I'm just checking on the meter. And we're like, oh, thanks for the service. But somehow it feels uncomfortable, because they're not showing up on a scheduled rhythm or something. I don't know what it is. Or because the mere fact that they still have to come check them means that something might not be trustworthy about me as a customer. Why can't I just call up my power company and say, OK, my reader says so-and-so, so-and-so, and that would be a good trust relationship, right? I don't know. We don't do that. Next comes the energy bill. Now, there's a big gap here between the meter check, which we trust much more than the energy bill at 0.35. We don't trust it because it's intransparent and doesn't really celebrate the value proposition. And again, Matt and I were talking earlier, and he suggested that maybe we should put that picture of the guy with the yellow hat on top of this bill, and then we'd feel comfortable about it. I don't know if that's how it works or not, but it might help. Now, this one here is the least trusted of all elements of the system. This is the power plant itself. Nobody trusts the power plant. And at this point, I have to say that we're completely irrational consumers. You said something earlier, Dawn, about paying attention to consumers. Well, consumers are crazy. It's very hard to work with them. This thing is clearly the thing that is the most guarded, most regulated. There's many committees observing this. There's many layers of security. There's many. Now, if it fails dramatically. But overall, it's far less dangerous than the electrical socket that we tend to touch and electrocute ourselves on every now and then, right? So we have an inverse relationship to trust to the things that deal with electricity in terms of trusting those that are the least dangerous, the least, and the most dangerous, the most. So the power plant that is, in a sense, the least dangerous because it's highly managed, we trust the least. And this socket here, which we see every day, and we trust the most, although there's probably the most amount of danger coming from it. You see there's an imbalance there. And when we design an app that deals with the smart city, we have a social apps lab here at Berkeley. At the social apps lab, we might say, okay, how can we build an app that makes the consumer more energy conscious so we can shave the peaks of the energy consumption and make the whole system more stable and more resilient? Well, in order to do that well, we need to understand what the consumer actually is willing to engage in. And how are we doing on time here? Are we out of time almost? So if we want to design a better game for this city, we have to capture the consumer and construct a metaphor of trust around these applications that describe the city and make it manageable and approachable. And the key thing I see from these slides, the conclusion I draw, is that the feedback loop is what builds trust, right? Why do we trust this thing more? Because we interact with it every single day. And if you order these things in terms of frequency of interaction, we see these stoplights multiple times a day. These sockets we see frequently. This we see when we walk to our house. This we see rarely, but we see it more often than this. And we go back in this order, and we just simply realize that we don't pay enough attention to the power plants. We don't hang out with them enough, so they're not our friends, and we don't trust them. So maybe apart from making tours, organizing tours to take people to power plants and doing some relationship therapy and showing them that you can trust the power plant, we just have to think about how can we increase the frequency of interaction with the source of the power and with the system that delivers the power. How can we make the system more transparent so there's more points of connection and there's more feedback loops? Once a month is not enough, right? If you get a bill once a month, that's the feedback loop you have with your power plant. Well, naturally you won't trust it because it happens too rarely and there's not enough cause and effect. So advocate for up to the second response in terms of power consumption and cost. We should have up to the second information displayed on these very interfaces that we know so well that tell us exactly how much what is coming out of here will cost us. Thank you very much.